everyone. Welcome to the Good Girl Confessional. I'm your host, Sandy Lowries, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to you by Women Beyond 40 magazine. Today in the confessional, I'm so happy to be introducing Kathy Barron to you guys. Kathy, who is based in California, is the host and the producer of popular podcast Women Who Sarcast, and she's also the founder and the editor-in-chief of Women Who Podcast magazine. Her mag is US-based but globally minded. Welcome to the confessional, Kathy Barron. Hello and welcome to the confessional, Kathy Barron.
Thanks for having me, Sandy. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here on your show.
Well, thank you for joining me all the way from California over in the US. I really appreciate it.
The right coast, yes.
Well, it would be sunny. Is it sunny over there at the moment?
It is today. The last few days have been kind of overcast, foggy, kind of like fallish.
Okay.
So it's not, it's not your typical, well, I'm in Northern California, so it's a little bit cooler than Southern California, but it's still nice. It's near San Francisco. You know how the fog rolls in and out of the bay. So
I do.
But you can't complain, really.
No, well, we're in Melbourne. I've been to San Francisco. I think it's just beautiful. It's so beautiful. So my beautiful niece and her wife actually live over there. What a gorgeous part of the world. But here in Melbourne, we're heading for winter. So it's starting to get cooler days.
That's good, I guess.
Well,
it's cooler. Like even the warmer days are cool here because it's like 75, unless we go through those heat wave cycles. So then it's like 80 in San Francisco, which is pretty unusual. But
wow, okay. Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you today because I'm so excited about your incredible new venture. So you are the founder and the editor-in-chief of a brand new magazine called Women Who Podcast magazine. Tell us all about that.
It's definitely something that I've wanted to do for a little while and haven't really had someone to push me off that cliff. And you had that honor, actually, Sandy, of pushing me off that cliff.
Oh.
So thank you for that. But it's interesting because there isn't, in the US, there really isn't any magazine or medium that focuses specifically on women podcasters. And, it's high time that something was created and featured women podcasters, had articles targeted towards women podcasters, and have it as a networking resource tool so that even podcasters and listeners can find each other and collaborate and, and come together and support each other. And it's been great. We had our first issue published in April, and it's a digital only magazine, and it's quarterly. For right now, I'm hoping in the next year or two that will become more frequent. But I have a great team of women that are also podcasters. I have a great writing team, great copy editing team. And this next issue is for July. And last issue, we had 7 featured podcasters, and you were on the cover, as everyone knows. And for July's issue, we'll have 9 featured women podcasters. So I'm hoping with each issue, that number will increase. And because I don't know that I'll ever really run out of women podcasters to feature. At least I hope not.
Yeah, that's so true. And look, first of all, I want to say a huge, huge thank you to you and your amazing team for interviewing me for Women Who Podcast magazine. It was such an honor. I think as an Australian podcaster and Australian female podcaster to be featured in the debut edition of a US mag that was highlighting women was so exciting. I was thrilled. And I've never been a cover girl before. So at 51, thanks to you, I became a cover girl for the very first time. It was very, very exciting.
That's awesome.
So,
well, I'm glad I could help you achieve that goal for you.
Thank you. That's off my bucket list now. Who said I was too short and curvy to be a model? I don't know. No, it was
That's
such
right.
it was such an honor. But what was really amazing was to see the magazine when it came out. You know, the incredible articles about so many amazing women who are out there just doing their thing, you know, grassroots podcasters, independent podcasters who are doing really incredible things. And thanks to you, I've actually discovered so many other female podcasters that I'm now listening to, and I think they're brilliant. I'm just so thrilled. And you mentioned that in the US, there's never been like a platform like your magazine, but in actual fact, I don't know that there is one globally. Certainly don't think I've seen one in Australia that highlights just female podcasters.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is definitely a global magazine, and excuse me, the next issue, the July issue, will have women podcasters from India, UK, and the US. So, I mean, I want that to grow and be like every single continent, country, state that's represented. So I think it's important to find those. And with every podcaster that we interview, they have podcasters that they know of that think would be a great contribution or a great podcasters to feature. And that's how it grows. You know, this continuing network of networking, I guess. And it's who you know, you just keep going down that chain of people that you know who know somebody. So it's been great to meet these women that I normally wouldn't have the opportunity to meet. And I'm glad that you have found podcasters that you may not have found otherwise. And that's the goal, the vision, the mission of the magazine, is to have them featured so people can find out who they are. And a lot of the stories are kind of similar as far as how they got started, the fears of getting started, and this, not necessarily the struggle, but the challenges that they have faced to be where they are today with their podcast. And there are some that have only been doing it for 5 months, and there are some that have been doing it for 3 years. And everyone, regardless of how long they've been doing it, are at different stages of their involvement, their evolution of their podcast. So it's great to see, and it's great to have the support, behind all of these podcasts.
Yeah, wonderful. And for me too, obviously, as a host of podcasts myself, it's been really amazing to see the community of women, and it's mind-blowing how many women are out there podcasting. It's perceived that podcasting is very male dominated, and I guess that is true. It's probably male heavy, but I think that the rise of female podcasters has been extraordinary in only the last few years. And I think for us at Women Beyond 40, because we focus very much on women who are over the age of 40, 50, 60, that I'm certainly starting to see a lot more engagement. Women are probably, slower to embrace new forms of entertainment and technology. And I guess we're late adopters of the podcast, but now that we are listening to podcasts, I've seen so many women over the age of 40 who are starting to produce their own. And I think it's just fantastic.
Yeah, and I think women are good listeners. And so I think they have a natural talent to have a podcast, because they are nurturers by, I mean, that's just their natural thing, is to nurture. And if it's a guest podcast, then, interviewing and listening to their guests and being curious and intrigued by other people's life experiences. And then, if they're solo podcasts, women have a lot of wisdom to share. And I think given that platform, that they can just let loose and it spread their sage and wisdom across the globe.
Yeah, I love that. And that's the tagline actually for the Good Girl Confessional, is the hard-won wisdom of women, right? It's I think it is really important. And I think there's an endless array of subject matter out there. So even though our stories may be similar in why we've started podcasts, the content is so extremely radical and different, and I love it. There's so many cool things. I started listening to hashtag history. Those girls I know were featured in your magazine. I just love it. It's kind of like, one of those podcasts that you just devour. It's clever and entertaining and also informative. And there's so many. And so I wanted to talk about your background, because you are a podcaster and you have an incredible podcast called Women Who Sarcast, and I'm a huge fan. Clearly, I'm sitting here in Australia with my mug.
And she was not paid for that endorsement.
That is not a paid endorsement at all. But that is how we actually met, because I became a guest on your podcast initially, which was fantastic. And now here you are on mine. So I'm so thrilled and honored. But so how did you get into podcasting, and where did that incredible name come from?
It was totally by accident. I mean, it wasn't something that I sat and thought about. And it seems, looking back, that that's how a lot of my life choices happen, is I don't really think too hard about things, is I just think of something and I'm like, okay, let's do it. So that's kind of how the podcast came to. And I was speaking with a friend who, we're very sarcastic. And when we talk on the phone, she lived in a different state. So when we would talk on the phone, we'd kind of feed off each other and we'd be like laughing so hard we'd be crying because it's sarcastic. And I'm like, we really need to do a podcast, because this is just too much fun. And, just how we feed off of each other. And so we started the podcast together. Unfortunately, there was some things in her life that didn't allow her to continue. And so after a few months, I kind of went solo. And Women Who Sarcast is kind of a name that we kind of came up with together. And, sarcast, I don't know, if it's a word, it is now. So it fits. And I had a friend of mine, Mario, who's a comedian, and he kind of sat in for like a year, 6 months, to kind of fill in that co-host spot. And he did a great job as a woman, and he was a lot of fun to work with. And it kind of came to a natural end, because I realized that I wanted to do the interviewing. And that's kind of when my podcast evolved and came into some kind of structured format, whereas before it was like a week to week to week thing, and you can't sustain that. You just get burnt out. And since having the format and the guest interview format, it's been great. I mean, it's been very smooth, and it just feels it's like the podcast, that's where it needs to be. And it feels right for me. And meeting you and all the women that I've met and just learned from, their life experiences, their stories, has been very fulfilling and rewarding. And, I've been podcasting for a little over 3 years. So it's nice to see how it's changed and evolved into what it is now.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary. And I wonder if podcast listeners realize that the average amount of podcasts created, like, when someone starts a podcast, the average, I think, is around 7 or 9, and then they burn out. And so for you to be going for over 3 years is extraordinary. That's huge. And also that it keeps growing, is really amazing. I mean, I love your interview style and your format, and I do love the sarcasm. Australians by nature are pretty sarcastic as well. So I just really love it. But you're right. I love that. I always say to everyone, oh, damn it, I wish I'd thought of that name first. It's so cool. Yeah, the Starcast. Well, you're right, because it's just a word. Even if it wasn't, it is now in the podcast world. We'll just coin it. That's it. We'll call it a Kathy Barronism, and keep it.
There you go. There's a lot of words that people just make up nowadays. So I figured I'll just chalk it up, put it on that list.
It's so true. That is so true. Yep, it's really cool. And how have you found the process of creating a magazine? Because it is I know from experience now that it's a lot of hard work. Ours is monthly, and a lot of amazing writers and brilliant creatives and terrific people who are on board with this project, which is great. But how have you found the whole process?
It's great. I mean, I love it. I went to art school for video production. So, I have that art background. And when I went to school, I had a couple of classes in Illustrator and in design. So I've been somewhat familiar with it. So getting back into using that software, it's, definitely all kind of coming back to me as far as the basics. So as far as the layout, I'm quite a perfectionist when it comes to stuff like that. Which I don't know, I think is kind of a curse and a blessing at the same time, because I'm very particular in how I want things to look. And I'm sure you can relate to that. And I've also self-published a fiction book called Token of Choice. So I've kind of ventured down the writer path. I don't know that I would give myself that label necessarily, but because it took me 6 years to write that book, and now people want a sequel to it, and I'm like, okay, well, you already know what the first book is like, so go ahead and feel free to write the second book.
Send me through some fan fiction.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's incredible that you wrote a book.
So I like the writing. And that was kind of an accident as well. I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I wanted to do like a web series. And it was just hard to find people to collaborate with. And then I moved back to California, and I was unemployed for a little bit. And I'm like, and then the, National Novel Writing Month, which is kind of like a contest in San Francisco. And I had never done that. And I was like, hey, let's, I'll try it. So, that's when you write 50,000 words in 1 month. And so I ended up writing 50,027 words, and, it was kind of a mess. It had like 3 plots and 2 subplots and, way too many characters, and, it was going in all directions. So that's probably why it took 6 years, because I kind of had to start from scratch to have the book make sense. So, but it was fun. It was definitely a journey that I am glad I experienced, because the characters basically told me how the story was going to go. And we would have arguments and discussions as to why I didn't want it to go a certain way. But the characters were like, no, it really needs to go this way. So that was fun. And my next venture with book writing is I want to write a kid's book. So that's still on the back burner for that. But as far as the magazine, I always love to create things. And, especially with this magazine, I've never published a magazine before. So it's just learning like from you and, what your magazine looks like, and just looking at other magazines to kind of see how they're laid out, and, but also have my own touches, my own style to it. And, the magazine is for women podcasters. I mean, this is their magazine. And, I'm always open to feedback and advice or brainstorming, as far as what people want in the magazine. So if you're out there and you want, different things to happen to the magazine, just send me an email and, we can definitely talk about it. Cause I don't want it to be, I have my vision of how I want the magazine to be and its vision, but there's still room for creation and expanding it. So, I want every issue to be better than the previous one, always. So,
I love that. And what I really like
there's
about
always room for improvement. Yeah.
But what I love about your magazine too is that you've actually got this whole section where, it's not just for the podcasters, it's also for the listeners and the fans of podcasts, which is really cool. And that you have sort of opened up this forum where, listeners can write into you and say, this is what I'm listening to and this is what I'm loving. But also female podcasters can write in as well and say, well, hey, this is what I've learned, or this is what I want to do. And that you've actually included not just interviews, which are really important to highlight, who these women behind the podcast really are, but you've actually, there's tips and hints and, advice for women also who are podcasters. And maybe there are a lot of women out there who want to start a podcast, who can pick up this magazine and read it. And it's inspirational for me as a podcaster. Certainly I've been thrilled to recommend, other women, I say to other female podcasters, you must buy this magazine and jump on board and read it. And I'm more than happy to introduce you to the team over at, Women Who Podcast, because it's an extraordinary kind of thing that you're doing. For me, anything that highlights other women and helps other women to sort of get an audience and to rise is really important.
Definitely. I think many podcasters think that they're alone in what they're experiencing. They're the only ones experiencing it. And, I know that there's other Facebook groups and forums that they can get the advice from, but sometimes those forums are very overwhelming and they're repetitive with people asking the same questions. And so with the magazine, it's kind of a place where they can go in their own time and read the articles. Like in the April issue, we had articles about overcoming imposter syndrome, fear of failure. And we had tips and tricks as far as how to start a podcast, as far as the audio, certain software that you can use. And then there's one segment called low hanging microphone, which is kind of a twist on low hanging fruit, which is like a corporate slang. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it's used a lot in the corporate world, and it drives me insane. And I make fun of it all the time. And so I was like, oh, low hanging microphone. It kind of has the same sense of, grab whatever's the lowest, information or and that was about the 3 C's of interviewing. So there's a lot of resources and data and statistics. We had a whole section on that. And then we also had like zodiacs for podcasters. So those who are into the, the woo-woo horoscope stuff, Crystal Warren is a great resource for that. And she put a nice twist on that information. So we try to make it fun and, informational and educational for everybody.
And it is fun because I was thrilled to say that the horoscope. I love that you call it woo woo. I just thought it was it's so fun. That whole section was fun. And my daughter Paris read that and said, yeah, you were spot on. They got you, Mum. So I think it was quite it was quite
well,
amusing.
What sign are you?
I'm a Leo podcaster. So there you go. Okay. Now you'll go back and reread it and go,
damn Leos.
Damn you. Yes. What are you, Kathy? What a star sign?
I'm a Scorpio. I'm like the best sign in the whole zodiac. Come
on. According to Scorpios.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's all that matters.
Hey, I was listening to your latest episode on your podcast, and you were talking about decision fatigue, and I was really captivated by that. We had an article in the magazine about emotional load and the emotional load that women carry.
Mm.
But I was really fascinated by this term, decision fatigue, which I hadn't really heard before. So
Mhm.
look, it was a fun and great ep, by the way. But also it was really informative because I was like, yeah, wait, I didn't even know there was a term called decision fatigue.
Mhm. And it was interesting because it came across, during my day job, this workshop about vicarious trauma. And, it was kind of part of that where the presenter was talking about decision fatigue. And it's for those that are like on the front lines, whether they're working with the homeless or in some sort of, medical field where they're taking care of other people and experiencing their trauma, their clients or patients' trauma. And with COVID and everything the last year, it's been definitely more intense for those workers. And having to make a decision based on your stress level, it's hard. It's hard to make a decision about dinner or what you're going to wear or, just anything because you're just so stressed out and you're carrying the burden of the pandemic and people's trauma that you're working with because you want to make their lives better. So I think that term decision fatigue is affects everybody, you know, regardless of who you are, because it's just we have to make a lot of decisions in our daily lives, and I think we kind of need to give ourselves a break and simplify things and figure out what's important and go with that and not just we need to say no more often, basically.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And it kind of resonated with me because I was thinking we talk a lot about menopause over at WB40 magazine because obviously this is the age demographic where women hit perimenopause and menopause, and we just don't think it's really talked
Mm-hmm.
about enough. And I was thinking about, you know, when you go through that, the stress of going through biological changes anyway, um, for a lot of women, one of the symptoms is brain fog. And I was thinking on top of all of that, you have to push through this constant, it's not really seen and recognized very much in the workplace that menopause can be debilitating for a lot of women. And so women just keep kind of pushing through, and we push through in our personal lives as well. And then I was thinking I could not think of a more apt term sometimes for when this overwhelm sets in of, it is really difficult sometimes just to make the most basic decision, like what are we going to have for dinner tonight.
Mm-hmm. And I think with the perimenopause and menopause, it's like you're not getting a full night's sleep, on top of the brain fog and the stress and the changes that are happening. And that definitely adds to it and doesn't help for sure.
Yeah, very true, very true. And so what advice would you give to anyone out there listening to this today who is thinking, oh, maybe I can start a podcast, or I really want to start a podcast? Because I do know I've had lots of women, that I've chat to on, various in different ways that have said, oh, I'd really like to start a podcast. So what would your advice be to those girls?
Well, I think it's important to know why you want to start a podcast, because I think that will help with the sustainability of the podcast. Anybody can, like when I started my podcast, I didn't have a why. I was just like, yeah, let's just do it. Everybody else is doing it. Why not? And luckily for me, it shifted and, is somewhat sustainable. Depends on what day you ask me. But, figure out why and kind of what the gaps are and where you can fill those and just go for it. It doesn't, I think for a lot of people, they think of doing a podcast and they jumped they jump automatically to the technical part or how much is it going to cost, and that's great. But just, know your why, and then everything else will fall into place, because it really isn't that expensive at all to get the equipment and at least get started, because you don't need expensive equipment and all the bells and whistles when you first start. You kind of grow into that. And I mean, some people even do it on their phones.
Yeah, that's true.
So
and
just
that's
go for it.
I love that. Just go for it, because that's one of the most important things that I sort of say to people. They go, I can't afford it, or I can't. There's lots of different ways to do it. And I'm kind of really lucky here at the Good Girl Confessional that, I have a partner who is a bit more tech savvy. And so the editing process, etc., he was able to really help me with that and show me. But it doesn't have to be that complicated. And as you say, a lot of people have podcasts that they just record from their phones. And some of those podcasts have huge followings, because really, I think it's, as you say, your why is really important. I think for me, mine started as a blog. The blog, evolved over many, many years. And then eventually its iteration became the podcast, because for me, it was really important. My why is always to share the hard-won wisdom of other women, so I think as long as you're really clear on that, and really, let's face it, you could start a podcast about virtually anything. I don't know, you just got to think about, personally, I think about what you're really into. What are you passionate about? What drives you? And it could be, I don't know, maybe you've got a turtle collection, or maybe, you are an advocate, or whatever, I don't know. But I'm saying it could be anything really. And you can have a podcast about podcasting. I don't know, but it's really interesting, and I think it's a fun thing to do. One of the things, I don't know if you agree with me on this, but my advice would be, don't go into this thinking about that you might make money, or that don't worry about right? I mean, when I start,
don't even go there.
Forget that,
because you won't do anything for that in that case.
Very, very few podcasts actually make money. I'll just put that out there to everyone. But it's, I think, it's fun. I think go into it. When I started the podcast, I had friends who did say, why are you doing this? And I'm like, because I really want to tell women's stories. There was fear, there was fear that I would be, am I just yelling into the ethos? I mean, is anyone actually ever going to listen to it? If you make a podcast and no one listens, is it still a podcast? I don't know. But I think, but I went into it with the same view I did when I started my blog and when I started the magazine, which was, I'm really passionate about this, and I feel like it's really important, and I'm just going to put it out there and see what happens. And what's been really beautiful is, there's a lot of doubters who don't think that the stories of women over 40 are important, or that the stories of women in general are that important. And I feel like WB40 and Women Who Podcast magazine are proving that that's actually not true. They are important, and people do want to read them.
It's great because, and I think it's great because it's like our magazines are something that maybe people didn't even know they needed. But until it's out there, how are you going to know if it's something that people need? And you just need to, I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying and putting it out there in like a year or two. If it just isn't your cup of tea anymore, then it doesn't need to continue. But, I'd be surprised both of our magazines that would happen. I mean, I really don't see that happen.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think as far as creating your own podcast, it's like there's so much technology and software out there now to make your life so easy. You just plug in a USB with a microphone and, that's all you need. It's just, then the hard part is actually talking into the microphone and telling your stories, or, doing your podcast. To me, that's the hardest part. The techie and the equipment, that's easy.
Yeah, but as you say, like you'll certainly have no shortage of guests in your magazine, and certainly no shortage of guests on your podcast, just like I've been incredibly blessed like that as well. And as you say, networking, if we want to call it that, I call it like building a community, because I think at the end of the day, every woman that I've had on the podcast has said, hey, you know who you should talk to? And then they have recommended other women, which has just been so amazing. I get people who contact me all the time to say, hey, I've got a story that might suit the podcast or the mag, but also I think you should really talk to this person. So women, I've discovered are more than happy to really shine a spotlight on other women to help them and to say they've got a really interesting story. I love that. I love it. And I think that if, women, really, I believe women want to see other women rise up. That's what I believe. And I know that there's a narrative out there in society, and I talk about this a lot, that says that women like to be pitted against each other, or that we're competitive with one another. But that hasn't been my experience through the podcast or the magazine. So what's your experience with that?
No, I agree. I haven't really experienced that within the podcast community. Not necessarily competitive, but I think it's mostly, 99% of the time it's each podcaster lifting the other up. But I think there's also that other part that you're always comparing yourself to, and I think we do this as human beings, that you're always comparing yourself to the Joneses and what the Joneses are doing. And it's like, it's hard not to do that, because you see a podcaster that has, a bazillion followers and seems to have their shit together and are doing social media posts like constantly. But you don't know the backstory. You don't know what's really happening behind that curtain, like the Wizard of Oz. And you need to and I'm guilty of that all the time. And you kind of need to reel it in, because you'll just drive yourself insane.
Yeah, I think that's really
And I also wanted to
important.
mention, I'm sorry. I also wanted to mention, as far as starting your own podcast, if there's someone that you can ask to be a mentor, that would also be a good. And if anybody wants a mentor, just let me know. I'd be more than happy to be that for you. And, I won't micromanage you at all.
I love that though, because mentorship's really important. And I think people get a bit scared. They think like mentorship is sort of some corporate term. But really mentorship is just like, one human being really helping another human being, to set goals and to give advice, and, to even sometimes just to discuss things. Like I find doing what I do with the magazine and the podcast, to have such an amazing group of women who've been writing for this magazine, and who are, there's a number of women who have written for each edition, who are amazing, but just as a sounding board to say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about for a future edition, and this is what I was thinking, and do you think it will work? It's kind of pretty amazing, because sometimes I do get a bit overwhelmed because I'm full of ideas, but can they all work together? And I think that's really great. And so just to have that kind of advice and mentorship and friendship, because sometimes they'll say, yeah, look, maybe you're just like reaching too hard, or maybe, I love that, but does this element and that element really go together, or should they be in separate editions? Just whatever it may be. I think that that's been really enormously helpful. And I'm so grateful that I have people that I can use as a sounding board. And I know, like, through doing this as well, it's been, as you say, for us as well, it's been global. So meeting women in the US and the UK, and meeting women who are in India, and meeting women who are basically all over, has been incredible, because they bring to, like, the diversity is extraordinary and important, because it brings a whole other layer to what it is that we're both doing, I think.
Yeah, and I think even though we're all podcasters, we each bring our own unique life experiences and cultures, and how things are done, like in the different countries. But we have that one comedy, and that's podcasting.
Yeah, which is
So it's
true.
kind of like meals always bring people together. It's kinda like, the microphone is bringing people together as well.
Oh, I love that. It's like community microphone. I love it. It does bring people
Right.
together, right? It is so true. And I was saying it before. I just think it's so brilliant listening to different podcasts, especially female-led ones. And that's, no slur against the boys, but I think that male podcasters do tend to get a lot more attention and a lot more media and coverage than female podcasters. So
Mhm.
what you're doing is groundbreaking and amazing. It's such a brilliant initiative. I'm so proud that I was a tiny part of that. But I think too, it is really important in the media. In lots of different genres of media to make sure that women are highlighted and that women are in the forefront, because it says a lot to especially younger women and girls coming through, that if they start to see positive role models, that this is something that they could do, this is something if they choose to, and
Mhm.
that, that there are a lot of women out there who are creatives and doing amazing stuff.
And you mentioned role models, and it just made me, before you said that, I was thinking how we always have these celebrities that we say are our role models, and it's our idols. And it's like, you know what, we need to kind of shift that a little and start having our role models and our idols as like the independent podcasters and the women podcasters and the women that are in your magazine and the podcasters featured in Women Who Podcast magazine. And those are the people that we need to really start looking to and looking up to, because they're, we're all trailblazers and we're all paving our own path. And, that's that's who we need to, put on a pedestal, so to speak. Although I wouldn't want to be on a pedestal, but those are the people that we need to raise up and look to for the wisdom and the encouragement.
Yes, yes. I think I love how you articulated that, because that's so true, and that's part of the ethos of what we're trying to do. And I know what you're trying to do is to actually shine a spotlight on, people who are like you and I, people who, we could be your neighbor, or we could be your workmate, or we could be your friend, or we could whatever.
Mhm.
I think that's true. And I was having a chat on another podcast recently with Tracy Spicer, our newsreader, who we were both talking about exactly that it is unattainable for a lot of us to be that celebrity, or to look like that celebrity, or have that success like that celebrity. I think it can be damaging in some ways to only have famous people or celebrities as role models. And you're right. I think it's what they're achieving is brilliant, and I don't want to take that away from any celebrity. But the reality is that for most of us, that is not our life, and that will not be our reality. And so you're right. I think that really looking to everyday people who are doing kind of incredible things
Mhm.
is important. It's so important. And to go, well, look, I'm not an Instagram influencer, and I'm not a Hollywood celebrity and whatever. But I am paving my way, and I'm doing my thing. And if more, if we shine the spotlight on those people, that's just so important for all of us. Because as you said, it is really detrimental to be comparing ourselves to people where it's unattainable for us to be like that person.
Mhm. And social media has like totally enhanced that like thousands of times. I mean, when I think about growing up, I never had a computer at home. I didn't even have a computer in high school. So, I didn't have those influences, but we still had that societal pressure. But even nowadays, it's like that societal pressure is just like 1,000 times stronger. And I think it really affects our teens and our young adults to be this perfect TikTok whatever or Instagram influencer. It's like you don't know what's happening behind the scenes, and I think that's a lot of the issue. Even with the celebrities, they can put up whatever they want on IG or TikTok or whatever, but how are they like on a day to day that they don't show on social media? So, I think it's it's important for you and I and other podcasters to be authentic. And I know sometimes that word is overused, but I truly, genuinely believe that we need to be authentically ourselves and not pretend to be something that we're not, just so we can get, followers or likes. Because there's more. It's so like on the surface. We all need to go a little bit deeper, and that's why I like these interviews with uh, the podcasters, is because we do go a little bit deeper. We don't, we ask, how are they doing? What is their experience? And, they're very honest and no hold bars. They just put it out there and like, this is the struggle that I had. And, and I'm glad that I stuck with it and fought through that struggle to come out to the other side.
Yeah. And I think that's been really important for me as well, to kind of try and get that across, because, I'm 51 years old. This is who I am now. You know what I mean? I'm not.
Oh, you're just a youngster.
Yep. So young. And I'm 51 years young. And, like, so you go, well, at the end of the day, this is who I am. And, I'm the same person with my friends and my family as I am on this podcast and as I am in the magazine. And as, I think at the end of the day, I agree. I think that this kind of authenticity is really important. When people come on the podcast and they go, oh, am I allowed to swear? Or am I allowed to not? I'm like, yes, well, fuck yes, you can. Because because I do. And I realize that at times I swear, and, so what? It's, and I've been on this podcast drinking gin with women and I've, whatever, because that's who I am. And I think that's kind of important. I think it's, you've got to be who you are. And I agree with you. I think that in showing the reality of life and what's going on for us behind the scenes, I mean, and look, don't get me wrong. Of course, there's things in your personal life you don't, put all over social media. But I do think that talking about your challenges is really important. I loved that I was asked that question for your magazine. What challenges have you faced? And how did you overcome them? And I think that's important, because not everything is rosy. Not everything goes smoothly. And I was a guest recently on a podcast in the UK, and she asked me, in the UK, and she asked me exactly that. She sort of stumped me with this question, which was a great question, but what have you done and failed at? And what did you learn from it? And I was like, that's such a great question, because in life I don't believe anybody who says I've never failed at anything, like I think you're a hugely lucky person if that's true.
Very lucky and a liar at the same time. But I think it's important to also look at what you've accomplished and how you got to where you are today. I mean, because a lot of us, I don't think, do that. And the struggles that we've gone through to get to where we are today. And, we're all pretty amazing people. And everybody's struggle is different, but it's very relatable as well. So
I think so. And I think in sharing the struggles, though, what's really nice is it makes people feel more connected, because they're like, oh, great, I'm not the only person who bloody can't decide what to have for dinner, and I'm not the only person. I've just moved house and I've made sure, like, there's this one section, like, I set the books up behind me and I made sure, I got a podcast. But believe me, there's rooms in this house that are still full of boxes and that are yet to be unpacked. I mean, that's a reality, right?
And you'll alphabetize the books later. Is that what you're saying?
As you can see, I'm a bit nutty in that I like to color code books. It's a bit nutty. but I actually realized I packed them in the same order that they were going to come back out on the shelf. So that made it a bit easier. I was just like,
wow,
I know.
OCD to its finest.
There's some damn organization there. I say that there was a lot about this move that was not organized. And it took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. And it was a bit hectic. But anyway, that's all right. Because we're human, right? Like, that's life.
Right. Yeah. It's true.
It's true. I gotta love it. But I do. I think like in kind of, I know the word normalize gets thrown around a lot at the moment, but I feel like in normalizing that life isn't perfect, that it makes other people feel far more comfortable because their life isn't perfect, because no one's life is perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
That's it. We solve the world problems.
Solving them one podcast at a time. Look at that.
Drop the mic.
Boom. So I want to say big, huge thank you to you, Kathy Barron, for coming on the podcast today and for coming into the confessional. I hope it wasn't too painful. I didn't ask you to confess too much. And
no, but I mean, as long as I don't have to say like 20 Hail Marys and 500, Our Fathers, I think I'll be good.
There's none of that going on in this confessional, so don't worry about that.
I'm not going to burn as I go off the mic. Lightning's not going to strike me.
Nope, none of that at all. It'll be like, it'll be the podcast angels singing from on high. But thank you so much for sharing your time and your incredible wisdom. And I'm so thrilled that you have started Women Who Podcast magazine. I will put all the links below in the show notes for this, where you can get hold of this magazine. Please do subscribe. It's incredibly affordable. It's amazing. If you love listening to podcasts, you're going to love this magazine. And if you are a female podcaster, get involved. It's pretty incredible, and support this venture. And also listen to Women Who Sarcast podcast, because it's brilliant and funny and sarcastic, and I love it. So thank you so much, Kathy, for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, Sandy. And I just want to put it out there. If any listeners or podcasters want to get in touch, you can just go to our website at womenwhopodcastmag.com. And I'd love to hear from you, and let's have a conversation. So thank you, Sandy. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Love you lots, and can't wait to see the next edition of the mag.
Likewise.
Bye.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is brought to you by WB40, Women Beyond 40 magazine. Available now at WB40.com. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to quality podcasts. We're also now available on YouTube. We chat with really interesting women about their hard-won wisdom, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. Bye for now.